I'm so excited to share Module 6 with you because it gives us a chance to practice everything we've been working on so far. We'll do this now in bits and pieces, but in an entire site rather than just kind of piecemeal. So let's walk through the site in this lesson, and I'll kind of talk through how we're going to do this, and then we'll jump straight in the next lesson. So you can see here, we've got this full portfolio site. We've got this nice little hero section. These are all part of a content collection. Same thing with these recent projects. We've got a React form. Even if you don't know React, we're going to keep it real simple, just to remind you how to embed UI frameworks inside of Astro. Then we've got latest blog posts here. You can click into any of these and read them. You can see they're nicely styled with the little author section down below, or you can go and actually paginate through the blogs. We're going to use the get static paths method here to generate all these ahead of time, and Astro is going to give us that nice helper for that. Now, I've also got projects, which are just a list of different projects, in this case on my channel, but just because I needed some real projects here. We've even got a nice for page. If I come to a page that doesn't exist, you get this here along with this Let's Connect newsletter form. So this is what we're going to build out kind of step by step, and it should give you a chance to practice building components, working with routing, working with UI frameworks, a little bit of CSS, and all that is included in this module. Now, you definitely need to download the code I've included below. We'll actually start the next lesson talking over that. I should mention that we're going to do some not best practices in CSS because I really want you to focus in on Astro. I'll give you most of the CSS ahead of time in just one big block file. If you ever do get stuck, you can always jump over to the repo. Just make sure you grab the lesson. Now, in the course, I've actually included that below as well, so that's probably the quickest way to get here, but you can also search for the lesson. Just a note that I've redone these lessons, and so now I wish I would have named these differently to start with, but now I've got module 6.1. That's the one we're on right now, and eventually all the rest of these will be here as I record them. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in with actually starting building this up step by step. Let's get started by downloading the code, installing everything, and then getting everything up and running with our layout file. Now, I've already navigated to the folder where I've placed the downloaded files here, so I can just npm I, that will install everything, and then I'm going to npm run dev. This should install Astro and then get up and running with our dev server. Okay, so there we go. If I come over here and refresh, you'll see that now it says hello world. Now, I've included several of these starter files here just to make it a little quicker for us. I really want you to practice and not have to do a bunch of tedious things, so you can actually kind of get the feeling of accomplishing something here, and a full site at that. So here you can see I've got a layout file that's got a few things in it, but not too much. What I want to do is get our index file to use this layout file. Now, we've done this plenty of times before, so you can pause the video and try to do it yourself, or you can just do it along with me if you want. Right inside this main is where we're going to put what's called a slot. Remember, this allows us to kind of inject other content into this section. And then I'm going to actually use this right over here. So if I grab this here, and let's go ahead and just pull that in with layout like that, it should auto import, and then I'll drop my hello world inside of there. And now this should be using my layout. Now, I do want to mention one quick note, and that is you may notice that I've got this @ sign, and that's because of the way I set up my tsconfig here. This allows us to basically use these paths, and if we haven't talked about that, I think we have, that's what's going on there. All right, it makes it a little easier to reference it, especially if you move files around. Secondly here, I want you to notice this global CSS file. I put this nice warning up top here so you know that there's a lot of bad practices in here, but I'm trying to not make you write a bunch of CSS. And so most of it is going to be inside here. And as long as you follow the structure I give you in this module, everything should look like mine. But we need to actually pull this in somewhere. And you'll notice right now it's not pulled in anywhere. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to go ahead and import this, or put this up top here. So we'll import, and then I'm going to use that same @ syntax where we'll grab our styles and then grab our global CSS. And notice as soon as I save this, everything should change over here. It's pulling in everything we need. Now I have gone ahead and included the Google font we need here as well. Everything else though is coming from this global style sheet. I like to go ahead and name these if I can remember. So we'll say styles, and then I'll have other things in here as well. The only other thing I want to do in this lesson though is I want to extract the head into its own section. And this is good practice, especially if you have a bunch of other things going on in the head, and that allows you to kind of keep it in its own section. So that's what I'm going to do, and we'll import it up here in a second, but I first of all need to create it. So I'm just going to call this base head.astro, and then what we're going to do is just grab all of this and move it over here. So let's come over here. I'm going to drop this all in right here, save that, and then come over here. We're just going to do base head like this, and it looks like it doesn't want to find it. So we can do it ourselves. That's fine. I'll just come over here. We're going to call this components, and I'll import base head from, and then I'll go ahead and use the same syntax here, even though it's in the same folder. we'll go basehead.astro. Okay, so now everything should work the exact same. You see the font is still being pulled in, but now it's happening over this way. Now, once we've got this base head, I want to pass down to it things like a title or those kinds of things. So I'll pass anything I get from the page directly inside of here. Now, you might remember we get all those off something called astro.props, and you can extract them up here, right? I can grab this from astro.props and then destructure them right here. So we could destructure like title and whatever. But since I already know that I want everything to go to the base head, all I'm going to do is come over to the base head and simply spread all those in. So I'll say astro.props like that, and that should pull all these in. And now I can pass something in from this index page. Now, right now, let's just do something as an example. We'll say like home. And if I come over here to the base head, I've passed it here through the layout to the base head file. And now what I want to do is get it inside of here somehow. So let's take a title tag here. We're going to grab this from our title. And then I also am going to pull in a meta tag. So meta name, description, and the content is going to be the description I get in. And let's close that off. Now, generally speaking, you actually want your title to be pretty early on like this, and that way it shows right away in case like this takes a while to load. I'll go ahead and throw the meta description up there as well. And we need to actually get these in the file. So we're used to passing props at this point, but I'll come up here, we'll grab the title, and we'll grab the description. These will both come from astro.props. So now notice, as soon as I save, this says home because that's what we've passed in the index file. So this index goes to layout. The layout passes down all the props, and the base head picks up the title and description. Now, in this case, the description doesn't exist, right? In fact, it just is typed as any. And if I were to look at the HTML, we're actually going to see that this is just undefined. It's just an empty string. I included another file over here called site data, and this includes a default title and description. So let's take a moment and remind ourselves how to pull this in. As a TypeScript file, I can just import it just like I could with a JSON file or anything else. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to import, except in this case, just the particular item I need. It happens to be the only thing in the file, but base data here from data, site data. Now what I can do is pass in defaults here for both the title and the description. So I could say base data.title, and then we'll do the same thing over here. And we'll say that the default here should be base data.description. Okay, so now these are both being used if nothing else is passed in. Now, right now I'm passing in home, but if I don't pass this in, it's going to use my default, which is Katie Howe's portfolio site. So this site data controls every page unless I happen to override it with a title or a description. That means the base head always has a title and description, even if it's just the default, but I can always override that if I pass something else in. I'm starting this lesson over here with the finished code because you can see the nav bar that we want to add, and you can also see the footer. So we're going to add both of those here. So let's come back over this way, and I'm going to start with the footer. So just down below here, let's go ahead and put a spot for a footer. I guess we don't want to add it yet until we've created the component. So I'm going to come over here and let's go ahead and do this in the layout as well because it'll really only be used in the layout. So I'm going to call this footer capital.astro, and then in here we're going to have a footer. Now, if I look over here at the finished code, which you can actually grab a link to the finished website in any of these lessons and kind of pick off stuff so you don't have to type it all out manually if you don't want to. If you just like to do that kind of stuff, go for it. But now we've got this footer, and I've just put that text inside of a paragraph tag. And if I come over here, now I should be able to pull in the footer like this. And if I enter, it pulls in. Let's go ahead and put it with the rest of the components, though, right over here. And now it shows here. Now, it's not going to look right yet because we've got to actually get other content in here, which we don't currently have. Now, if I come over here to the footer, we've kind of hard-coded this here. So there's a couple things I want to do. First of all, I want to make sure I use and copy, which is the HTML symbol here for the copyright sign. And then I also want to make sure that that 2025 is dynamic. So that way, when somebody comes to the site, we're making sure that they're seeing their current year. Now, this isn't really something you need to do on sites, but I think it's a nice little quick reminder of kind of where client-side JavaScript is run. So I can go ahead and come inside here and say like new date and say get full year like that. And then it should show down there as 2025, but this will only happen on build, and then it will hard code it in here. So I may also want to have some kind of client-side JavaScript that checks on this as well. So one of the ways we can do that is to go ahead and grab this here, and we can just wrap this inside of a span. I'm going to give this an ID here. We'll give it the ID of copyright, and that makes sense. And then we'll jump down here and write a little script tag. Now, the cool thing about these script tags in Astro is if you're using TypeScript, like I happen to be, you'll see that you'll actually get typing directly in here as well. If you don't really want to use TypeScript, that's fine. You can come over here and just change this to base. And you might have some other options you need to change as well as we go, and you can ignore a lot of the typing we do in this, but we're going to use TypeScript very lightly. So even if you're not familiar with it, you should see some of the benefit of it and get some of that benefit without having to be like a TypeScript expert. And I certainly don't feel that way myself. So let's go ahead and grab the copyright. I'll just call it copyright span equals document.query selector. And we're simply going to grab the ID of copyright. And I technically should type this as like unknown and then as HTML span element. And that way I have this and I've typed it properly as well. So I'm going to take copyright span .text content, and I'll simply set this to new date, .get full year, and then technically this should be toString. It doesn't make me do that up top, although maybe I should as well. So now we know that not only will this be correct here, but it will also be correct afterwards, after it's actually run this on the page. And because I put this in script tags in the page, it'll actually run this on the client, on the actual device that loads this web page. So this will be baked in by default whenever I build my site, but then it will be updated as the client hits that page. So perhaps to show this most quickly here, let's get rid of this here. You're going to have to pay close attention right over here because as soon as I save, it should remove that and then pop it back in with client-side JavaScript. Okay, hopefully you saw that it was very, very quick, like I mentioned. All right, we'll go ahead and put that back, and that way it's got a default, but you can override it if it happens to change. Okay, that being said, next what we need to do is create the navbar. That's the section right up here, and that's what we'll do in the next lesson. It's time to add our navbar. We're going to do that right here. So let's go ahead and create it. I'll do it again in the layouts since this is only going to be used on the layouts. I'll do capital nav.astro, and then we'll have a navbar here. Let's just call it navbar so that we can see it. And then I'll come over here and say nav like that. Don't see it pulling in. That's okay. Let's just copy this down. We'll copy both of these and say nav. Okay, so now everything should actually look correct as well. This is taking up the middle space like we'd want. This is in the footer, and this navbar section is up top. So let's go ahead and open up the nav, and we want to think through kind of how we want to layer this. If I jump over to the finished code, you'll see that we've got projects, we've got this icon, and then we've also got the blog. Now, I don't want to have to hard code these. It would be better if I had some kind of array up top that I could then just use. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come over here, and up top in the front matter, when it's building, it should have access to this array. We'll call it nav data. You can call it whatever you want. And this will be an array of different objects where we'll just have the title. In this case, I'll call it projects for the first one, and then an href. And again, I'm just going to call this projects or whatever it happens to be. So let's copy this down a couple times, and then we'll change this out. So this one right here should be home, and this should just go home. And then the next one will be blog, and this one should go to blog. Now, you'll remember that this middle one here should have some kind of SVG. That's the icon right here. But I'm not actually displaying it here, and I'll show you why. We're just going to actually embed that directly in this component, and based off of the href, we should be able to determine basically which one needs the SVG and which one can just point to whatever other section it's going to. So I'm going to come down here, and in the navbar here, we're going to have a UL, and this should actually have a role of list to it. That's actually partially how I set up the CSS, so you'll want to make sure you add that. And then what we're going to do is loop over the items in our nav data. Now, again, whenever we loop over any items, we need to use those curly brackets. So nav data.map, and I'll just call I for item, I guess. And then what we want to do is come over here, and instead of returning, which would be inside of parentheses here, I want to go ahead and use these curly brackets because I want to do a little bit inside of here as well. So we can do a little test inside of here before we return, and that is I just want to see if it has an icon or should have an icon. So I could just say something like const has icon, and then we'll set this equal to I.href if this equals just the home route. Then I'll know if it has an icon or if it doesn't. Okay, so now that we've got that available in each of these iterations, I can go ahead and return here, and we're just going to return an anchor link. Now what I want to do is just come in here, and we're going to point this to I.href because that should be the same no matter what. Now we need to actually put something else in here, but it depends if it's an icon or if it's the actual text. So let's go ahead and check if it has an icon, and if it does, then we're going to want to display the SVG. Now you can actually copy this from the favicon right here. I've gone ahead and done that on my clipboard. I'm going to put this in parentheses just to make it a little cleaner, and I'll paste this in. The only thing I changed is I changed the fill to current color. So you probably want to make sure you do that as well. So this is if it has an icon. Let's go ahead and close this down. If it doesn't have an icon, then I simply want to put the I.title. So there we go. Just like that, we've looped over every item. We've got the projects, we've got the blog, and then for this one, it'll show the SVG. Now there's a couple things we want to do here. First of all, I want to make sure that I go ahead and add a class. So I'll say class, and this is just going to be a link, and that should make everything look mostly correct. We'll actually fix this in a later module because I don't want to build out the link component right now. The other thing though I need to check is if it needs an ARIA label. ARIA labels make this accessible, and in this case, we want to make sure that the one with the SVG has an actual label to it so that we know where it goes if you're using something like a screen reader. So once again, you know the drill at this point. We're going to use the has icon. If it does have an icon, we're simply going to give it the i.title as an ARIA label. Otherwise, we'll just say null. So it doesn't need one at that point. So that means now we've got projects, we've got this, and we've also got our blog. Now, as we start to build out the site, we're going to see that we're going to need this link used elsewhere. So we're going to actually build out our own custom link component in a little bit, and we'll come back and fix the look of this. But for right now, it at least looks kind of similar to what we want it to look like. In the next lesson, we're going to build out this hero component, and you can see that we've got a chance then to look at these other use cases for these links. Here, this one points to an anchor link, and this one actually points to a file. We're going to build out the core idea of this hero component, and you're going to need a couple of things. You'll need this image, and you'll also need the file that we're going to attach to this link here. So if I come over here, you should be able to grab those in the description to this lesson. I'm going to just drag them in now. The PDF should go right here under public, and then under here, we're going to actually create another folder here. I'll call this assets, and that's where I'm going to drag in the avatar. Maybe headshot is a better name there, but anyhow, those are the two files you're going to need in this lesson. Now, what we're going to do is close down this layout and close down this base head. We shouldn't need those for a bit here. And I want to go ahead and add another component right here. Now, we don't actually have a proper components folder here, so let's go ahead and add that, components. And I'm just going to go ahead and add this one. We're going to call it hero.astro. For right now, I'll just say section, and then I'll say hero. All right, so that way we know it's actually being pulled in. Let's get rid of this, and we'll call this hero and pull this in up top. And once again, let's go ahead and separate this out. So we'll say components. This will be layout, which is pretty clear because it's called layout, but hopefully that helps. Okay, so we've got hero being pulled in here. What I want to do is now build this whole thing out. Let's start with our asset. That's the image. And I'm just going to call this Katie. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. We'll grab this from, I'm going to go to assets, avatar like this. And that way you don't have to navigate up a file tree. You can just use the @ which starts you at the src directory. So let's come down this way. And I always like to add ARIA label here. The reason I do that is if you don't do that, let's come over here actually and just see it ourselves. And I inspect this, you'll notice that I've got a nav, I've got a main. If I were to come over and look at the accessibility tree, which I don't know if it's showing here, accessibility, there we go. All right, you can see here that I've got generic, which is not very helpful, right? And if I come inside here, I'll see static text, which is hero, but that might change as we go. However, if I add an ARIA label, so I could call this hero section, and then I save, you'll notice that this now says it's a region called hero section. So that way this section is actually defined as something besides just a section, which basically is a div tag if you don't add some kind of label to it. There are other ways to assign labels to that as well, but at least for now, that's the simplest. We actually also need to give this thing a class, and this should correspond with the CSS I've set up, or we're just going to call it hero. There are way more optimized ways to use images in Astro. We'll look at that later, but for now, let's just go ahead and grab the src. We're going to grab this from Katie, but notice that I actually have to do dot, and then it grabs the src itself. Again, we'll get to that later. That's just how Astro imports images, and that way you get access to things like the width and the height, and you can use those in Astro image components, which again, we'll look at in a later module. For now, I want to make sure I set the alt here to Katie House, since that's the person's name. Now, this is kind of the main identity for the page, so I want this to be an H1, and I'm just going to put, hi, I'm Katie. Now, you may want to put something more descriptive there, but at least for now, that should work. Below here, I'm going to have a paragraph tag, and this will say I'm a self-taught designer and developer obsessed with quality. Again, if you don't want to have to copy those, you can go to the finished site, which I'll link in the description, and copy those out. I do have a couple of links, and probably the easiest thing is to loop over some data. So let's go ahead and add that up here. So we'll call this data, and I'll set this to links, and this will be an array. And here it needs a few things. It needs an href. In this case, we're going to point this to Katie House cv.pdf. That's the thing in our public directory. And I'm using this just as a reminder of what happens with this public directory. Astro doesn't touch it, so these will just be built at the base of your site. If you happen to put this inside of a /docs folder or something like that, then you would do docs right off the beginning of this and then the name of your PDF. But Astro won't touch any of these files, which means you've always got access to them on build exactly where you put them. Now, I'll also need the name of the link, so let's go ahead and add that here, and we'll do download CV, and then let's copy this down and do one more. In this case, we're going to point to our contact form, which doesn't exist yet. but it should be at this route, connect, like that. And then the name here will be let's connect. Now we need to actually loop over these links. So let's do that just down below here. I've got a couple of CSS helpers in that global CSS file. One of those is called columns, like this, and that will be what we're going to use here. It'll just style stuff for us nicely without us having to write a bunch of CSS. I'm going to take those links and I'm going to map over them. And for each link, for right now, I'm simply going to pass it to an anchor link where we'll have the href be the l.href, and inside here we'll have the l.name, and those show down that way. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and add the class here. We'll get rid of this in a little bit anyhow, but you can add link, and that will style it to at least kind of look correct. This one's correct. This one's not quite yet because we have yet to build out our link component. Now, there's actually two items here that I think would make for really good components. So let's practice a little bit more building out components. We've done this one here, the hero component, but it's mostly just been static HTML, nothing super complex. We built out a heading component earlier, and this will be really useful for us because we're going to use it all throughout the site. So that's what we'll do in the next lesson. And then I also want to build out a link component that includes a bunch of different varieties we'll use throughout the build. We're going to replace this H1 with a custom heading component that can take heading 1 all the way through heading 6. So I'm going to come over here inside my components directory here and add another one called UI. I typically like to put UI elements that will be used all throughout the site inside of a directory like this. And I've actually scoped the tsconfig to where you can just do @UI like this, and it will reference stuff directly inside there. So that's what we're going to do is come over here and I'm going to have a heading.astro component. Now we've built this out earlier in the course and we may have done it a different way. I don't even remember exactly, but we're going to get practice at doing a custom tag, picking off different properties, writing a little bit of TypeScript, and then actually doing some style in this one as well. This is the only item in this particular module where we'll write some CSS, and it's very little CSS, but I just want to remind you how you can write CSS. We've already seen the global import, but now I want to do some scoped stuff just for this heading component. So let's start with defining some front matter here, and I want to use an interface. This is a TypeScript thing, and we'll call it props, and this is going to extend HTML attribute. Now, you may remember if you went over the TypeScript module here that I can basically say this should take the type of H1, and then TypeScript knows the kinds of things I can pass to the component. So I can't pass like a checked equals true because that doesn't exist on an H1 tag. But I can pass other things like ARIA labels or IDs or classes, anything that I would use as an H1. So in here, I want to add to the default things a couple of other ones. Tag name, which we'll define in a second, and then also size. Now I need to actually tell it the type that it should expect. And basically, for both of these, it should be H1 through H6. So let's go ahead and define a little object up here. I'll just call it heading options. And this object will have H1. And then over here, we'll have a class called H1. Now you could do extra large, you could do whatever you want, but that's what I'm going to do just to make it real simple. And then let's grab all of these, which I'm going to select and use text pastry, which is just a nice little extension. Grab these, copy them over, and paste those in there. Now what I can do is define these here as the key of type of heading options. I'll copy this down and then talk through that real briefly. So what I'm saying is of this type, the things that exist here, they have keys, H1 through H6. That's what these should expect, the tag name and the tag size. And notice if I hover over these, it basically says it can only be one of those. Now that's as much TypeScript as we're doing, so hopefully that makes sense. But now what I want to do is go ahead and grab my tag name and my tag size. And then I'm simply going to spread in the rest, that is anything else that may come in that matches my schema here, the HTML attributes of H1. Now because H1 all the way through H6 are all the same, I just picked H1 and that should work. I'm going to grab all of these from astro.props. Now remember, we want to be able to have this as like H1 or H2 or anything else like that. If I have this as a lowercase tag name like this, I can't pass in anything. It won't actually reference this. And so if I come in here and have whatever my slot right here, and I try to use this, so let's actually try to use that. Let's come over here and we'll copy this and replace the H1 here with our heading. And I'll drop hi, I'm Katie in there. And then let's use tag name. And we'll do H1 and tag size. Let's do like H2. Okay, so this is what we're passing in. If I jump over this way and I actually inspect this, let's move this down below here. So if I inspect this right here, you'll notice that the tag name is actually tag name, all right? Because I've used a lowercase tag. HTML can immediately use any lowercase name, even if it's not defined in the spec, and will actually just create a tag called that. So in order to use my tag name that I passed in, I need to reassign it to an uppercase. So we'll say const tag equals tag name. just an oddity of HTML, but now I can come in here and it will actually redefine that. So now this should say H1 or whatever I pass in. So let's select this again, and there it is, H1. Now it is using a larger size here, but not the one I passed in. So we need to do a little bit more here. I'm going to go ahead and grab my class list here. Remember, this is one of these directives we can use where we can pass in a bunch of things, including strings or arrays or even objects, and it will combine all these into one class list. It takes in an array, and we'll first of all give it a string called default. We'll use this on every single tag, no matter what we pass in. The other thing I'm going to want to use is heading options, and I'm just going to pick off the size, the tag size that I passed in, and so it'll be H1, H2, whatever one it passes in, it'll then grab that string and insert it here as well. That means it can have an H1 tag that has an H2 size, etc. And then finally, I want to go ahead and spread in the rest of the items. So the rest here, this is anything else I pass in, like an ID or anything else. Now, the way we've set this up, technically, this could also override our class, so you may want to be more precise there, but for this simple example, hopefully that makes sense. So now if I come over here and I inspect this, let's get rid of this. You'll notice that it now actually has H2 and default because I passed in H2. Anything else I happen to pass in, so if I pass in something over here, let's say like, I don't know, we'll say ID of like hi, then it should also say ID of hi, so it can pass that in. I can't, however, pass in something like checked. All right, it won't do that because an H1 tag can't take checked. So hopefully that reminder jogs your memory about why we're setting it up this way. Now, the last thing I want to do is actually write some CSS directly in here. You'll remember any style tag inside of a component is automatically scoped to that component. So we're going to say default here, and I'm going to write a little bit of CSS here. So we're going to set this up as a flex item, and that way you can actually have multiple things inside here. We'll use that, I think, in one place in the site. If we do, we want to make sure that we use a gap. Now, I've got a bunch of variables defined in the global CSS config file. If I scroll down here, all these variables essentially control the entire site. So I'm just going to pick off one of these. This is the only time we're going to be doing this, so don't worry, you don't have to memorize all these. Space to extra small like that. So if we happen to have two items in here, they'll be spaced out by that amount. I also want to make sure that I align those items then baseline, and that way they sit kind of on the same line. And in our case, we're going to use them for two text items. In fact, let me just show you where those are at so you're not trying to imagine it. It's right here. So this is actually all part of one H1 tag, and this is the second item inside of it, but you can see how they're baselined against the bottom of the text, which is what I want. Okay, lastly, a couple other things we want to do. I want to make sure that the text wrap, which is kind of a new CSS property, is set to balance. So if it has to wrap, it'll try to make that equal. Then we're going to use a line height here. And again, I've got another variable called headings. We'll just make sure that that comes in. Now, if you happen to not see this auto-completing, it's because you probably don't have an extension set up the way I do. It's called CSS var complete, and you can point it to any file that happens to have CSS variables, and it will give you those IntelliSense anywhere throughout your project. So I've actually done a video before on that. I'll try to link that below if you're interested in that, but that's how I'm getting this to show up. All right, that was free, but now we actually have the stuff coming in as we expect. Now, the last thing we need to do is make sure that these sizes here, H1 through H6, are defined down below. So I'm going to say H1, and this is font size, var, and again, last time we're going to be typing this, 2XL will be for H1. I'm going to go ahead and paste this, copy this down several more times, and we're just going to grab this right here. I'll do Command D to grab all these, and I'll use text pastery again just to go 1 through 6, and then I'm just going to basically drop these one at a time. So we go to XL, then we go to large, I think it is, then I go to medium, finally I go to small, and then I think I go to extra small for some reason, although we don't use that anywhere else in the site. Now, what that allows me to do is to keep my semantic tag as like H1 or H2, whatever it needs to be, but then again, style it depending on what I want it to be. We've done that before. If I come back over here, now I can come over here and do like H6 and see how ridiculous that looks. There you go. We're now getting a very small size, but it is still the H1. I'll put this back at H2, and now that should be set to go. Okay, so the heading component is built out. We'll use this all throughout the site now. We've got it nicely typed so that way we can get all the things we need access to directly in IntelliSense. Next, I think it's time to build out this link component. Even though it kind of looks correct, we don't really have the varieties we want. We want to be able to have a variety here for the actual favicon. We want these to be kind of my ghost buttons, this to just be outlined, and this to be our primary button. So let's build out the link component, and we'll use it in all these different places. That way we can actually get the styling we want. We built out this complex heading component. Now let's go ahead and build out a link component. And this will also be one of our UI elements. Let's just call this link.astro. And it should be very similar in the sense that what we're going to be doing is using a type of HTML, that's the anchor link, and then adding onto it. So let's go ahead and define an interface like that. We'll call this props again since that's the default. And then we'll extend here the HTML attribute. And in this case, we're going to pick off the anchor link. Now I want to mandate that it has to have an href. And this should be the type of string. And then finally, we're also going to have a variant, although we'll say that this can be optional. And in TypeScript, that's how you do that. We'll just say that we need primary. It could also be something called secondary. Thirdly, it could be something we're going to call ghost. And then finally, it may be something we're going to call icon. So those are the 4 options you have to pass in. Let's go ahead and come down below here and grab those. So we'll say href, variant, and we're going to set a default. That's actually why I didn't make it mandatory. And the default will be primary. Finally, we're going to spread in the rest right here, and we get all this from astro.props. Now, because I named this props in TypeScript, it automatically associates it here. If I named it something else, I'd have to do some kind of type assertion or something like that. But in case you're confused by that, why we're not like assigning that, that's why. Now, we've done this a lot before, so I'll go ahead and go fairly quickly through here. We want to attach the href here. I'm going to use the class list directive again. Here we'll have that link class that we've used already before, but then I also want to make sure I pass in the variant. That will have to be one of these 4 here, and I've got some CSS set up to handle each of those different use cases. Finally, let's go ahead and spread in the rest. That way, if I happen to pass something else in that's needed here, it'll pass it right along to that anchor link tag, and then we'll just drop in the slot. And just like that, we're set to go. Now, I haven't actually used this anywhere, so let's first of all go to our nav and replace this right here with our link. I tried to import that. There it is right there. Let's go ahead and just call this imports. And then we'll call this data in case that's not clear. And then down here, we don't need to pass in class anymore, but we will use aria label and href. Now we've got a new variant option here. And here there's basically 2 use cases. I want all the projects and blog ones to be a ghost button, and I want the icon to be an icon one. So what do we have that has icon? So we can just say if that's has icon, I want this to be icon. Notice I get nice IntelliSense here. That reminds me what these are. And that way, they're kind of all what they need to be. So this one now has the icon, projects show, and we get nice tabbing and all this kind of stuff by default because that's built into the CSS. The only other place we've used anything is in this hero where we've used these anchor links. Let's replace this here with our link. That's fine, but let's call these things components. And we can get rid of this right here. But I also actually want to pass in a variant. And I want to pick this off of l.variant, which doesn't exist right now. So it should be mad. But what we want to do is just add these both right here. So we'll say variant. And I'm going to define these as primary for now. And then this one I want to change to secondary. Now TypeScript isn't going to be happy here because you'll notice here I say variant. And even though it knows it can only take one of these 4, and these technically match, they could be any string, right? So there's nothing that keeps them from being that. So there's a couple ways to fix this if you're concerned about that. One thing we could do is just export this interface. And then here we'd have to get a little bit fancy, but I could have an interface. In fact, I probably need to change this to like link props, which means I also need to assign that over here. I could say that this extends now link props. And if I hit Control and spacebar, I can pull that in right here. So this is now our type that's being pulled in. And I can add on to this the name, which is just a string. Now, the reason I'm having to add on to this is because I've added something that doesn't exist in the original prop. There's other ways to do that, but hopefully that makes sense. I could use the satisfies keyword for links here and just want to make sure that I add it like that. So maybe let's call this link. And that way this is an array of links, and the link, each of them should look like this. Again, if you're not into TypeScript, this might just look like gobbledygook, but it does actually help you when you start to build out a project. So just a little more TypeScript learning on the side. Now it knows that this has to be only one of these 2, and it actually sees that it's primary and secondary, so it'll be one of those 2 being passed in. And notice these are all working for us. They would have worked without the typing, but in case that concerned you, that's kind of how you'd set that up. Okay, so we've actually got a few components built out. This hero component, which it has a couple of components embedded in it. We've also got the nav bar, which has a couple of these components here embedded in it as well. Now, if I go to something like projects, you'll see we've got this nasty 404 page. I mean, it's nice, but what we want to do is make it look like the rest of our site and kind of give the user a direction of what to do. So if we were to come over here, we could go ahead and add a 404 page right under here. That's what we're going to do in the next lesson. Here's the component we just built out on the finished site. And if I go to a page that doesn't exist like this, you'll see that the 404 looks almost the exact same, it just changes around one of the buttons and the text right here. Now, this is one of these decisions you have to make when you're building out a site, which is what do you make a component and like the same component with different props, and what do you just make a new component? In my case, this is close enough where I'd want to just find a way to extend the current hero component rather than creating a new component called like 404 hero or something like that. So let's go ahead and think through how you might do that. So if I jump back over this way and I close this down, let's pull up the hero right here. How would we extend this? Now here's the section right here, and also these links that I may want to change. So the way I decided to do this is just to go ahead and set up like a default content that we can then use down this way, but we can always override that if we want to. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to grab this right here. We'll just get rid of this. I'm going to call this like default content. And this needs to have several things. One of these will be links. But up top here, I also want to add in a spot for title, and I also want to add in a spot for like content. So let's actually go ahead and copy this stuff from down below, and we'll set this as the default. So I'm going to grab this here. We'll say that this should be the title by default. And if I don't pass in something, I also want this here to be the content. Now I may actually pass something in, right, to override these. So what I want to do is set up some props and then just set these as the default. So this is similar to how we set up like the title and the description for the entire site, you might remember. So here I can grab the title, and this will just be default content. Isn't that what I called it? Yeah, default content dot title. And I'm going to copy this down a couple of times. We'll change this out with Command D. I'll grab both of those together and say that the content should be the default content by default. And then finally, let's grab this down here. We'll say that the links should be the default links. Now these have to be destructured here from astro.props. And that way I've got these as the defaults. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass this in here instead of the text. Now I want to use title. If I pass something in, it will be whatever I passed in. Otherwise, it will use my default one, which is right here. We'll do the same thing down this way too then. We'll just make sure that we use content. Now, one quick thought here. We had a data file for our actual like site data, but here I'm doing this all locally. That's because this lives basically only in this hero components, and it's kind of scoped to this section. Now, you could do the same thing since we're only happening to use the title and the description over in that layout page, or the head, I think it was, over here. So we're actually pulling this in here. I could define it up here as well, but I may want to use that elsewhere. I may want to add extra stuff to that site data, so it kind of lives at a spot that may be used more globally. Whereas here, I know I'm only ever going to use that right here, so that's where I'm going to keep it, is right next to everything else. So just a little thought about like how to construct these things. And you may have a different preference, that's totally fine. Next, you may notice that this is angry because it doesn't know the type that this is. So once again, I want to actually set up some types. And what I'm going to do is, let's come over here and just add below here, we're going to add a type. You could also use an interface. I'm kind of going back and forth between them. You should probably stick to one or the other. Interfaces can extend other things, so that's why I use them. Otherwise, I typically use types. But again, you can do whatever you want. And this isn't really a TypeScript course, so I'm just throwing a few of these little things in for free. So here I'm going to say that I don't have to have a title, but if I do, it needs to be a type of string. I don't also have to have content, but if I do, it needs to be a type of string. And I don't have to have links, but if I do, they need to be the type of link like this. It needs to be an array of links. Now, because I've named this props, this automatically gets applied to this, which means now this thing is happy because it knows what it's getting. Okay, so we've done all that to make this more modular, and that way we can pass in whatever we want wherever we happen to use it. So let's go ahead and come over here to my index, and let's just copy this over. And I'm going to copy it like this to a 404 page. And in Astro, as soon as you define something as 404.astro or 404.html, it will override the default that Astro gives you. So now if I come over here, actually you can't see this yet. So let's go ahead and change the title to like 404. All right, so now if I come over here and I go to a different page, something that doesn't exist, you'll notice it now says 404 because I've passed in a custom title. If I don't do that, it'll actually look like my homepage, right? So let's go ahead and close this down, and I'm now just going to pass in the individual items that I want to be a little bit different. So first, that would be the title. Secondly, I've got the content. And then finally, I've got links. Now, these are actually fairly similar to the default one, so let's just grab these to make it a little bit easier on us. I need to wrap this in curly brackets and then drop in my array. And the only thing I need to change is that this needs to point home, and this should say go home. Other than that, it's the exact same. Now, we've got one other option here for customizing this 404 page, and that is it just says like Katie House right now. So what we could come over here with is a title that says 404 like page not found. And that way, like it's very clear you're on a 404 page. I can go home. It should take me back home. If I go to any of these other pages, it'll now use my custom 404 page instead of that ugly one. All right, so hopefully repping some of those components once again and even thinking through how to construct them has been really helpful. Next, I want to dive back into content collections. We're going to use this component right here to build out our very first content collection. In this lesson, we get to jump back into the beautiful world of content collections. And what we're going to do is build out a component here that will hold all of these. But to do that, we first of all need to define all of these. Now, this is not a lot of content, so in this case, you may not want to use a content collection, but it's a nice way to get another practice at it with a very simple component. So I'm going to come over here. The first thing I need to do is to go ahead and define the collection. I can do that over here in a content.config.ts file. Now here we need to export a const called collections. And the very first one we're going to export is one called features. These features are going to be defined up top. So we'll say const features like this. And I'm going to use define collection from Astro content. That one, not the runtime. Okay, so now that I'm in here, I need to define two things. One is a loader, and then I can optionally define a schema, although again, that's kind of the whole point of these collections. So the loader here, we got two helpers. We could either use like a grouping of files, or in this case, it's not that much content, so I probably will just use the file helper. So rather than the glob one, which we will use later for the blog. But here, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is going to be in my SRC content, and I'll just call this features.json. Now below here, we can have a schema, and this will take our z.object, and I see that z has not been pulled in, so if I hit Control and spacebar, I can pull this in from Astro content. Now this is an object, so it needs a few things. I'm going to say that it needs a title, which is z.string. Again, we're defining this schema using something called zod, and that's what it's pulling in here with z. I've got a description, and this will be z.string as well. And I've also got an icon, and right now I'm just going to embed that file directly there, z.string, and that will give us a chance to look at fragments and setting HTML, which it's been a while since we've done that. So this is now defined and exported as a collection. So that's all we actually need to do over here, title, description, and icon. But next I need to actually have that at content features.json. So I'm going to come over here, we'll do content, and then inside here, let's create a file. We'll call it features.json since that's what we said. And I'm going to paste this in, although you can download it in the description for this lesson, so you don't have to type all this out, which would be a nightmare. Now notice I've got title, description, and icon for all of them, but I also have one more thing. And it's a reminder here that you do have to have an ID whenever you define individual collection points. If you have a folder of different files, Astro automatically creates an ID out of the name of the file, although you can override that, and we'll do that later on. So now we've got the content collection defined and actually in our project. We do want to make sure we go ahead and restart the dev server. That's because of the caching involved here. We want to make sure that it's actually pulling in the fresh data. All right, so let's jump back over this way, and I want to create another component. Now we've got a UI folder here, but this hero one just lives kind of at the top level of components. It's used here. It's also used in the 404 page, but I may actually want to have nested folders here. And this just is an organizational preference. In my case, I'm going to say, hey, for the home, this is only ever living here. So since it's only living here, I'm going to make sure that I have the features.astro inside of a home folder inside my components. And that kind of helps you scope stuff. The first thing I need to do is grab my features, which I'll just call features from await, get collection like this, and this will be our features. To keep organized, we'll say that this is part of the contents here, and then down low, and I need to give this the class of features, just the way the CSS is set up. Now, to actually see this being pulled in, we need to come over here to the index, and below the hero, I'm going to go ahead and import features like that. Now, it is in the right place, component, so that works. I'll close that down, and now we can actually see it coming in here as we build it. The way I set this up, everything should be inside of a single div, and then we want to simply have our heading. If I jump back over this way, you can see it says I build fast, modern, sleek websites, whatever that is. So I'll come over here with heading, we'll pull that component in. Thankfully, we already built it, so it's not going to be hard here to grab our H2 because it's just a section inside this page. The size, we'll do an H2 as well, and then I'll paste all that content in. And this is what, tag size, I think? Yeah. Now let's go ahead and say that this is like a component. And now what I want to do is below here, inside the div still, I want to have a UL. This should also have a role of list. And here I just want to loop over each of my features and build them out directly in here. So we'll take features.map, And I could like call feature and then get feature.data off each of them. But in this case, let's just destructure data immediately to make it a little bit easier to work with. Now we want to return out of this map. So you don't want to do curly brackets. We want to do parentheses and return directly here an li tag. Okay, so this li tag is going to have a few things. We're going to actually use the heading component once again. And we want to make sure that the data.title is right here. I want to change this tag name. We're going to do an H3 and tag size. Let's do an H4 to make it a little bit smaller than a default. Below the heading, I'll have a paragraph. This is just going to be the data.description. And the last thing we have is the SVG. Now you might think you could come in here and do data.icon. The problem is it'll just drop the actual text in. This is a preventative measure to make sure that you're not injecting like raw HTML somewhere in your page where you don't want to. In our case, we wrote it, so we're fine doing that. So I'm going to come over here and we can use what's called a fragment. You can do this on anything, but in this case, I just want the SVG drop directly in here without any wrapper. And I can use the set HTML, which we looked at real early in the course, and I can just set this to data.icon and then close off the fragment. That'll actually drop the SVG directly in the web page. And if I select this, you'll see that this li actually includes an SVG without any wrapper at all. The fragment gets out of there and just drops the HTML directly in there. And just like that, we've done everything in this section right here. So not a bad start to content collections. We are going to get more complex. We've got projects and we've also got these blog posts. This is kind of the next level where we're going to add a couple of other things and build out a card component. So let's jump into that next. Next, let's build out this recent projects section. We need to go ahead and build another content collection, and you're going to need some images and you'll also need the file. And I've attached both of those down below. For the file, you can just drag that directly into content here. And this is a YAML file, which is another way you can do local files. So I just wanted to show you both JSON and YAML since those are kind of the two defaults. Notice that they've got titles, they've got images that point here to projects thumbnails, and then whatever the thing happens to be. And then they've got an href that right now just points to my projects because that's where they live currently. Now notice just like before, we also have IDs in all of these. That's a requirement here to make sure that it can distinguish between different items in this collection. Now that does mean we need to come over here and add another folder. This folder is going to be called Project Thumbnails, and that's where we'll put all of those images. Okay, so now that you've got all that set up, you should be ready to build out this next item in here, const, and we're going to call this projects. Once again, we need to define a collection. And once again, we're going to use the loader where we'll point a file to src content, and then this is projects.yaml. Now here, a lot of this will be the same, but some of it will be a little bit different because I want to remind you about the image helper that we get here. I can pull this in ahead of time and then go ahead and define an object, z.object, and inside here, then we'll also reference that image. So image like this, and it's a function that we're going to call. So this will actually make sure that the file that's being passed in the front matter, or in this case, just in the actual document, projects.yaml, references an actual image that exists. Now here, we also have a z.string, and this is the title, and we can go ahead and add some extra things here. So like say it can only be a max of like 65 characters if we want. Then I'll also have an href. This is going to be a z.string. We've got another little helper here where we can say that this is a URL. We want to validate that the string is not just any string, but an actual URL string. Now to use this, we need to go ahead and export projects down this way. And now we've set up our second content collection. Let's go ahead and restart this npm run dev. And that way it pulls all that data in fresh. Okay, so to actually build this out, let's come over to our index route. We're going to do this right underneath the features. Now we'll drop this directly here in the index, but let's go ahead and create another component. Here, I'm just going to call this projects.astro. And we'll have a section here with just projects inside here, so we know it's actually working. If I come over here, I should be able to pull in projects like that, and it should pull it in right there. So there we go. Down there, it's actually working. And we could use an aria label here. Let me show you the other way to do this. You can use aria labeled by and point this to an ID. So let's create an ID that's going to be like recent projects like this. And then when we actually define our header, we want to make sure to use that ID. And then whatever text we give that header, that will describe this section. This can be especially useful if your content is more dynamic. And that way the tag text always describes what the section is about. So let's go ahead and define that heading. And I'm going to have tag name. This will be h2, and also have tag size, and this will also be h2. Let's close this out, and then we'll call this recent projects. Now, like I mentioned, we want to make sure we pass along the ID. This will be recent projects, and this should be passed on by our heading component. So let's go ahead and import that. That should come in up top. We'll just make sure we mark this as a components here. And now this section right here should be labeled by recent projects. In fact, if I come over here, let's just double check that's the case. I'll show the accessibility here. And there we've got main, we've got the hero section, the feature section, and generic. Let's see, I think the problem here is I did this £. Yeah, and I can just point it directly to it and it knows that it's an ID. Okay, so now it's actually showing there. So I've got my hero section, my feature section, and my recent projects. So anyhow, those are a couple different ways to use the ARIA connectors to describe what sections are about. I actually do need to add a couple classes on here for this to work properly. This needs to have container, and it also needs to have a utility called rows. Okay, the last thing we need to do then is just pull in our projects. So I'll say const projects equals await get collection. We're going to pull in our projects. And here below the heading, let's see if I can make this look nicer. We're going to have a div with another utility class called grid wrapper. This will grab our projects. In this case, I actually only want the first 3, so I'm going to use the slice method here to just pick off the first 3, and then we'll map over each of those and just call them project. And for each project, we want to pass it to something we're going to call project card. I don't have that here yet, so let's go ahead and create that. If I come over here, we're going to look inside components, and this could actually live anywhere, so I could put it as a UI item. Let's just go ahead and add it here, and we're going to just call it at the top level. So we'll say project card.astro, because I'm going to use it both here, and I'm also going to use it in the project page. This is just going to be an article, and right now we'll just say project card. Okay, lastly, let's come over here and just pass the project to our project card. So project card, I'll hit Control and Spacebar to import that. Let's come up top here. Let's call this collection or content, and then those are components. Okay, so now we've got 3 project cards, but obviously the actual content isn't showing. In the next video, we want to pass this project along to the project card, render it there, and then we'll also set up the project page. Our project card is successfully rendering, but we're not really displaying anything yet. So let's go ahead and pass on our project, and we'll just call it project, and we'll pass along the project like that. So let's come over here and get this project card in here. We need some front matter to go ahead and get the project like this from astro.props. You don't need TypeScript here, but it doesn't know what this is unless we tell it. So if you want that help, what I'm going to do is just say type props. We're going to say that the project, and then I've got a helper from Astro for anything in a content collection. This is just called collection entry, and I just simply have to pass it the name. So in this case, this would be a project. So I can pass the entry like this, and now it knows that this should be the type of project. Now notice I've got all the things I'd expect, the ID, the body, the collection, all this kind of stuff. What I want to do is just pick off the data, because that's the only thing that really matters to me. So from here, we're going to grab the project.data, and I'm just going to destructure the things that matter here. So title, href, and image, I think. Okay, and now to build out the actual card. On here, I need an ARIA label, and this will just be the title, whatever that happens to be. Then I'll have a class, and this needs to be project-card. Again, the CSS I've got set up requires that. You can see it's starting to kind of take shape, although it kind of looks ugly right now. So we've got an image tag next. We're going to grab the image.src. Then I'll go ahead and set a width and height manually just so we don't get too much layout shift. So I'll go 400. And then for the height, I'll do like 225. That should be a 16:9 ratio. And the alt here, I guess we don't really have an alt. So let's just leave it like that for now. And it should show in like that. I guess technically it's like an image of the title, so maybe we can add title here like that. In this case, though, that's not super helpful because I've already got the title and the section is named that as well. So maybe let's just leave it like this to say it's just decorative. Now, we've built out several components, and that really helps us now when we go to build out these smaller components. I'm going to have my utility of rows, so a div with the class of rows. And then here I want my heading component that we've built out before. This should have tag name. Tag name here is going to be h2, although I guess in this case it'd be h3. I'm going to leave it like this because we're going to use it in multiple different places. So for right now, I think this will be fine. It will say the size should be h3. Let's close this out and have the title right here. And I keep saying size when it should be tag size. And then next I have a link component. This is just going to point to whatever the href happens to be. The variant here will be secondary. And then we'll close this off and just call it like view project. And this is a link component. Now, this did not import. There we go. Let's pull that in, and we'll make sure that we separate these as well. So we'll say components, just in case it helps you out. Okay, so now all these should be displaying just as we'd expect. This actually points to the project itself, so you can go and look at all these if you want to. There's actually a little info button where you can go and watch the video or see the code. Again, you'd probably replace these with your own. Now, we only picked off the first 3 here because we don't want every single project on the home page. But if I jump over to projects, over here, we actually want it to display all the projects. You can see that if I come over here to the finished build. Here I've got all the projects here showing as one of my latest projects. And we can use this exact same setup using this project card. Now, this shouldn't take long, so let's copy the index page and just change it to project. Here, I probably want to give this a different title. I could be like my recent projects. The description on the site should be just fine though. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. And now here's the really nice thing. Because we built out all these components, everything is modularized and it's really easy to just drop extra stuff in here. So we're going to extend this a little bit. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this with a div with container and one that also has a class of rows. So it should look like that. Inside here, we're going to grab our heading component. This should say latest projects. And we want to make sure that this tag name is h1 because that's what the entire page is about. The size will also make h1, and I need to make sure that this actually imports. So now this should work. If I come over here, it should say projects. We just named it project. Sorry about that. So projects like that. And now, there we go, latest projects. Now, the way we currently have our projects set up right here, I'd imported it on my home page as projects. And this is one thing we haven't talked about, but because these are default exports here, you can name them whatever you want. Everything that comes from an Astro file is just a default export. But this name is clashing with the name of the actual file. So I might want to call this like project wrapper or something like that. And we can pull this in down here. So if I go ahead and drop it in here, you're going to notice something. And that is that I've got this project wrapper, and then I've also got this here. And it is showing only 3. I want it to show 6. But if I jump inside here, here's where I actually do the call. And this is one of those things you have to think about when you're going to reuse sections throughout your site. So even though this is correct the way I've set it up, it's kind of hard to use it in these 2 different places. So we need to refactor this somewhere. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab this just like this, and we're going to jump over here to the index. And instead of referencing projects directly here, I'm going to drop all this in here. We're going to import the heading right down there. And then here's what I'm actually going to call projects. So projects like this. Now this kind of will fix the problem. I need to come back over here to the projects component, get rid of everything here, except for the grid wrapper. Now if I come down here, this one will look correct, right? It's got these 3. I'm slicing automatically, which I may not actually want to do. So what I could do, let's get rid of this right here, is I could just take in like a limit. This is the number of projects it would show. This is astro.props. And here I can define this props where the limit will be a number. And I'll make this optional, so you don't have to pass this in. And there are a variety of ways you could do this, but I could just say like if there is a limit, then I want to make sure I slice just to the limit. Otherwise, I simply want to take the projects and map over them and drop them directly there. So that might look like this, where I don't slice if there is no limit. I just pass it directly here. So if I refresh here, you'll notice that now all 6 show because I have not passed in a limit. So I'll come over here and pass a limit. We'll say something like 3, and now only 3 show. Now the cool thing is if I jump over here to my projects, this project wrapper, which is what I happen to call it right here, I don't have to have a limit. And so if I come over here and I look at this, you'll notice that now it's just the actual project cards and they're unlimited. It's going to show all the ones I have available. So I'll get rid of those extra sections and you'll see that now I've got all 6 showing here. And then I've also got just the 3 I want showing on the home page. All right, we've made a good dent into the site, right? We've done all this, all this, all this in the projects page. Now we could jump straight into the contact form, but that's going to be using React and I'd rather stay in the land of content collections while we're there. So we're going to take several lessons to build out the entire blog post structure. That includes the content collection, the cards, the blog pagination page, and the individual pages themselves. Let's build out our blog content collection. I'm going to come over here. We're just going to call this blog, and we're going to define the collection. We need a loader here, and we're going to use the other one that comes from Astro. This would be the glob loader. That should have imported up top for you once you hit enter. And then I need to go ahead and define a couple of things in here I can do, but I need to define a pattern. Now here I can actually point to the collection where this will be found. We're going to put this at content blog, and then it'll be anything inside of here with an MD extension. So .md like that. This will be the pattern it's looking for. Now before we build out the schema, let me come over here to our content. We're just going to create a new folder here. It needs to be called blog since that's what we're saying it's called right here. And I want you to go ahead and take all the files that are attached to this lesson and drop them directly in here. There will be some markdown files and also some images. Just like that. So you should have 7 posts and 7 images. Now, if you really just wanted to type all this out and you feel robbed that I didn't let you do that, let me know. But I'm assuming that if you get the point, that now we're just trying to practice it, not type all this out. But I'll go through this briefly. You'll notice we've got titles for each of them, slugs for each of them. I'm using a slug because by default, it's going to grab the name of this, including the folder name as well. And I want to actually set a custom slug. So I'm just going to define it here. It happens to be the same thing the file is named. So you could get that another way. We've gone over that in the past, but this overrides the default ID. And now we can use the slug instead. I've got the description as well. I've got an image that relatively references the actual image here. I could put this anywhere. You could put it in assets if you want. I typically keep images with their content collection, unless they're like a single file, like our projects, I think it was, that I put those up there. You may want to do it a different way. It doesn't really matter as long as you relatively reference it. I've got a date for the pub date for each of these, an is draft, and I've also got an author, which we're going to look at in a little bit. Okay, so now that you've got that, let's actually build the same schema out here. So we're going to take a schema. We're going to use an actual image file, a local image file, so I need to make sure I pass this in as an image. And we're going to return here then z.object, where we define our schema. We'll have a title here with z.string, with a maximum length here of 65 characters, not map, but max. Down below, we'll also have a description, and this will have a max character length of 160 characters. I mentioned slugs, so let's go ahead and add that here as well while I'm remembering it. And this is just going to be a z.string, and that will be what we use to identify each of these individual items. Our image should just be that image function we got back, so it's going to double check that it actually is an image. Pub date will be a z.date. Then we're going to have is draft. We won't make this a requirement, but it'll be a z.boolean, and then we'll make sure that it is optional. Finally, I do want to have an author, but we're going to do that in just a second. Let's actually make sure that this is exported down this way as a blog, and then let's restart the dev server, npm run dev. Usually I find that that's just more consistent. You don't technically have to do that, but again, sometimes it doesn't work for me if I don't. So I just always do it. We're going to grab our blog here, and this will be from await get collection, and I'm just going to pull in the blog. I did that just because I want to console log it to make sure we're getting what we want. So now that I've console logged it, let's refresh there, and yep, it's all being console logged down this way. Now notice the slug is now being used as the ID. I've also got access to the slug, which I'll use to actually redirect to that individual item. All the rest of this is as you'd expect, including the body right here. I console logged it just to make sure that you can see what we're getting, but I do want to add one more thing, and you might remember that we had an author on there. One of the things we learned with content collections is that they don't have to be local anymore. It used to be that way. Now you can have local files or local groups of files, but you can also pull in content from somewhere else. So we're actually going to pull in content from a third-party service using an API, and then we're going to connect these two so that our authors that we pull in from a third-party service have to be listed as one of the blog members. Now in this case, it doesn't super make sense for the site because it's all her personal site, so she's probably not going to be posting stuff from other people, but I wanted to get a reference between two items in here, and I figured this is an easy way to do that. And the last lesson I mentioned that we would be pulling in data from a third-party service. That third-party service is JSON placeholder. There's a chance that this goes down at some point, but it's been consistent for the last several years, so I'm assuming it's still up and running for you. If it is a trouble, you can just kind of skip this section and remove the authors or don't worry about them. Okay, so that being said, let's go ahead and pull in the authors. What I want to do is come down here to an endpoint they have called users. Now this users is just going to give us an array, I think of 10 people right here that happen to have names, usernames, emails, all this kind of stuff. We're just going to pick off the actual name. That's the only thing we super care about. Okay, so let's grab this right here. We're going to copy that to the clipboard. And just down below here, I'm going to have const authors, and then I'm going to define a collection. And the loader in this case is not going to be anything local. It won't be using glob or it won't be using file. Instead, we're going to write our own little async custom loader. Now this is just going to go ahead and fetch. So res await, we're going to fetch this endpoint, the one I just copied to my clipboard. There are of course more like robust ways to do this, but for now we're just going to do it and assume that we're going to get back data every time. So we'll do await res.json, and then the loader itself, I'm getting a type error because it needs to have something returned. I need to take the data and I need to map over the data. We'll just call this like P for person. You can type it more specifically if you want to. Let's just actually do any, so we don't have to worry about that. In this case, we're already not doing it super robust, so I'm not going to worry about it. I do want to return directly out of here though, so instead of using curly braces, I need to use parentheses and just return an object. Now, every one of these has to have an ID. Now, they actually have something called ID, so I can use it directly there like this. Now, they actually have an ID, so I could just use ID like from p.id. However, like it's just a number, and I probably want to reference the actual name. So I'm just going to say p.name. I do also need to grab the name. This is going to be from p.name. And technically, I could grab this off the ID since it's the exact same thing, but I want to remember how to query another layer down. So I want to have some data that we look at as well. You'll see that here in just a second. Now, I could define a schema here, but it's not necessary. Let's go ahead and export this down here. Authors like that. And then I'll go ahead and restart my dev server, npm run dev, come back to my index page. And here I want to just swap this out. Let's actually just change it right here for authors. And if I come back over here and refresh, you'll see now I've got the ID for each of these items. And then inside here, I've got data, which then references a name. Now, again, this ID that's already here is the same as here So you don't really need the name, but I want to remind you how to query another layer down when you're referencing a different collection. Hopefully that'll make sense here in just a second. So the last step I want to show you, let's move this back to blog, is if I come back over here, I want to make sure that each of these blog items has an author, and the author needs to be a reference, which I can hit enter and pull this in from Astro content right up here. And it needs to reference another collection. In this case, it needs to reference authors. Every single blog post must reference an ID of an author's collection. Now, if I jump over here, you might remember, let's scroll back up since I replaced that console log all the way up. It has to reference an ID like this, right? So every blog post has to reference one of these individual people. So if I jump over here and we open one of our blog posts, you can see that the author is Curtis Westsat or whatever that is. And that's one of the ones we just saw right here. So I've already done that ahead of time. But the nice thing is the data for these is totally third party, right? I'm actually pulling that in live from the internet when I go to build my site. As a reminder, anytime that you're actually referencing something like this through a collection, Astro will cache this on build, and that includes SSR. So this isn't live data, it's when you build data. So only at that time, it's going to check all this stuff here and pull in this data. But now I'm pulling in third-party content, checking it against my local files and ensuring that they all match. So now we've got everything we need to actually build out these cards. All this front matter comes from our markdown files we already have, and now we've added this extra little component of pulling in authors from a third-party service. Let's go ahead and build out one of these cards here, and rather than trying to do them all at the same time, I'm just going to come over here. We're going to create another little subfolder here. We'll call this blog, and then inside here I'm going to have a blog card component. Now it's going to look a lot like our project card, so let's drag this in here and just rename this to blog card. There's enough different here where in this case, I actually feel like it's better to actually build this out as a separate component. Now, the way that this imported earlier gives me a chance to show you why I like to use the @ sign instead of all this. So this tsconfig here, these paths, these compiler options, now that I've changed where this is found, it's trying to find the heading and link component, but it's at a different level, so it can't find it. However, if I just had used the @ UI in this case, because that's the way I'd set up my tsconfig right here, so I can actually reference it directly there. Notice that when I move it, it now will work automatically. So that's a little tidbit there. You can go change the other one if you want to. In this case, I actually want to reference my blog, right? We've got several other things we need to reference, and some have changed as well. So I don't actually have an href, I have a slug instead. And if I just come over here and hit Control Spacebar, I'll see the other things. I've got an author, I've got a description, I've got a pub date, and I've got isDraft, but I don't really need that. So for now, I'm just going to comment this one out so we don't have to worry about it, because I want to actually pull it in somewhere where we can see it. So I'm going to scroll down. Maybe let's just do it at the top, because we're not going to keep it wherever we put it anyhow. So what I'm going to want to do is instead of getting an entire collection, let's just get an entry like this. It'll be from blog. And let's just get one of these files. Let's see, AI and web development. Why not? All right, let's pull this in over here like that. Okay, so this blog right here, this should be a blog entry. I guess let's call it that. I'm now going to simply pull in my blog card. So blog card, there we go. And remind me to get rid of that. But I'm going to pass here a blog or a post, I don't know, a post blog entry right here. Now this seems not to be happy, so let's make sure we're actually getting something here at blog entry. And it is actually pulling in properly here, but I probably just have named this something else. So let's come over here and we'll call this not project, right? But blog post. What did I call it? Post. And then here, this would be post.data. Okay, there we go. So we actually are getting some stuff in here, and it kind of looks like we want it to, right? But we're missing lots of things. If I come back over here, we do have a title, but I also have a date and an author and a description and a link down below. So let's now build this out. First, I want to change this to say blog card for the class because there's some different CSS because we've got more stuff going on here. This image looks just fine. The heading also looks fine here with an H2 and an H3. But just below here, I want to use one of my utility classes called columns. And we're just going to put that on a div here. And here we're going to put the date. And then we'll also put the author. So let's come back to those in a second. Below the div, we're going to add our description. We're going to uncomment the link, but I want to change this here. This should always point to /blog, no matter where it's at, and then the slug. Okay, cool. That only leaves a couple things. Let's add this author first of all. And in order to get access to the author, let's go ahead and come in here and console log author like this. Let's make sure we're not console logging anything over here. And this is going to yell at us because it could not be there, just the way that this get entry works. Because we're not going to keep it like this permanently, I'm not going to worry about it. It could be undefined, and that's why it's not happy. But if I scroll all the way down here, you'll notice that the author gives us an ID, and it gives us a collection, but not the actual data. Now, again, in our case, the ID actually is the name, so we could just use it directly, but I want to remind us how to query that second layer down, which will also explain why we're getting this type error right here. So back over this way, instead of destructuring author actually here, let's go ahead and just call this author, and I'm going to get this from await, get entry, and then I'm going to query the author's entries for the post.data.author.id. You have to actually pass it an ID. And I guess I could use the same thing here, right? So instead of manually typing authors, I could say whatever the collection happens to be. Now, if I come over here and hover, you'll notice that this could either be of this type or it could be undefined. That's because the get entry can be looking at remote data as well. Because it's just a singular entry, it doesn't know until it already queries it. You might remember the reason that Astro does this is it ensures that you don't over query data you don't need. In this case, I'm explicitly saying, hey, get me this referenced data. And I'll just say by author dot, and again, now we're in the actual author entry, .data .name, which happens to be the same thing as if I were to just grab the post.data.author.id. That'll look the exact same, but I wanted to remind you how to query, so we're going to do it the proper way. All right, .data.name. Now, the other item I have here is the date. And this date is just an actual date. In fact, if I put it in like this, you'll notice it gives me the entire string right here. I happen to be in Mountain Time in the US, so that's what it's showing me, but it'll show you whatever your local date is. And this is based on the entry we put in the blog post. And we're going to use this in a couple of different places, so let's go ahead and build out a little UI component. I'm just going to call this formatted date.astro. This is going to take in a pub date. This will be astro.props. So we're going to destructure that and type this props here as pub date. This should be type of date. Now here, technically you should use the time tag. And this allows you to do a couple of cool things, but I'm just going to come in here and drop in the pub date.toLocale date string. I'm going to say that it's an undefined location. Now that'll just be whatever one I build it in, but either way, I'll say undefined. But the reason I want to say undefined is I want to get to the options here, which is to set a date style. We'll just say that this should be long. The other thing you want to do is set a date time, and this attribute should be an ISO string. So I'll say pub date.toISO string like this. Now, the reason we want to do it this way is it allows crawlers to actually see dates as they're written here with the date time, but allows people to see their like pub date in the style they want. So let's actually use it by coming over here, and I'll pull in the formatted date past my pub date like that, and we'll close that off. All right, and somehow in that, it messed up all my orders for stuff, so there we go. Okay, so now it's showing those next to each other. I did remember that in here I had surrounded this with a strong tag. Probably should have just done that in CSS, but I guess that's why it was there. So now you can actually see it a little bit better. Yeah, we've done this now with one card. In the next video, I want to come to the index page and add the 3 I want just to show here. All right, let's get these on the home page. I'm going to come over here and we're going to do this a little bit differently since we're going to have this paginated blog page. So I'm going to take the blogs here. We'll just call this like posts. We're going to get the collection and we'll get all the things in the blog collection. Then we'll just do everything directly here on the page. Now it's going to look a lot like this. So let's copy this one down. We'll say recent posts. And we'll change this to recent posts because these have to have separate IDs. We'll just call this latest blog posts. Now if I come over here, we should see those 3 and then we should see the next 3. Obviously between these 2, we want to have the contact form and we want to change these to actually be blog posts. So inside here, I'm going to add a div with the class of grid wrapper. We're just going to loop over our posts. In this case, I actually want to sort them first though. So I want to take my sort. We're going to take A and B, so the first and the second. We'll just compare them as we go. So I'll say new date. This will be b.data.pub date. I want to compare this to, let's see, the time. So let's grab the time here, and I'll just subtract it here, and we'll take a.data.pub date. Okay, so that should get me those in order. You can see I've got 7 of them now showing, but I don't want all of them. So let's just slice 0 to 3. And then for each of these, we're going to map over them. We'll take each post, I guess is what we'll call it. We'll take the blog card and we'll pass the post to our post. And then let's close this off. Okay, so now all 3 of those should show. And since we did all that work of getting the cards ready, that looks great. I do want to come up here and just remember that we can actually query off of this, do a filter off of this. So let's do that. Let's grab the data. And let's make sure we don't grab anything where the data.isDraft is false. Or rather, we only want things where the data draft is false, right? We don't want any with draft equals true. So if I were to come into, I don't know, this AI web apps. So web apps, there we go. Let's change this one to true. And now it should not be here. Yeah, so it disappears. That's good. We don't want that. So this first post now is the first one in kind of the chronological order that is not marked as true or as draft. Now we've got a little messy up here, so let's clean some of this up. Okay, so we've passed these all in here. However, I want to go ahead and look at all the blog posts. That would be right over here. Now, obviously this page doesn't exist yet, which is why we get the 404. But if I were to jump over this way, you'll remember that we've got a paginated blog post. We've got this little component to build. Then we also need to build out the next and previous button. It's time to build out our blog landing page. Now, what I want to do is come over here and create a folder called blog under pages. And now because this is going to be paginated, I'm going to come over here and use the spread syntax like this, and we're going to call this thing page. In fact, that's required by the paginate function that we call it that exact thing. Now, the first thing we need to do is actually get our content in there and then kind of break it up. So hopefully this will make sense when we do it. We're going to use get static paths like this. We've used this before, but now what I want to do is query all the blog posts and then pass them to a paginate function that we're going to get right here, paginate like this, and we're going to return it right here, paginate. This takes 2 things. It takes the data, and then it will also take how many items it should include in each page. So let's come over to the index since we've already done some of the hard work of getting this right here. So let's grab this and drop it over here. And this needs to be inside here. So we need to await, which means this needs to be an async function. Okay, so we're going to await get collection. Let's go ahead and pull this in here, get collection, where we get our data, make sure it's not draft. And then we're going to pass these posts directly to paginate. Now, if we just pass it like this, it won't be sorted, and we actually want it to be sorted. Now, this might be a good use case for like a little lib function that does all this for you, but for now, we're just going to grab all this and do the same thing. So let's come over here, and we're just going to sort them just like that. So it'll sort them all before it breaks it up. Now, remember, we want to actually tell it how many pages to include each time. So we'll say page size. In this case, let's say something like 3. So 3 posts per page is what it should include. Now that's actually kind of it. So if I come down here, we can just const the page like this, and this will be from astro.props. And then I can go ahead and grab our layout component. And for right now, I'll just have the title here, say like my blog or something, and we'll fix that around in a little bit because what I want to do next is actually show all those in our blog cart. Since we've already done the hard work before of creating those, it's quite easy to actually get them in here. So we'll have a div with a class of container. Then I'll have a section here, and this section will simply say aria label. We'll say blog posts, And this needs a class of grid wrapper, which we've used a few times now. Now the page we get back includes a bunch of stuff, but importantly includes our data, which includes each of the items. So we're going to map over these. These are just our blog posts. I guess we can call it post. We're going to take our blog card like this, and these each require a post. So let's pass it the post like that. Now if I jump over to the actual blog, you should now see 3 showing up right here. If I go manually, since we don't have a button yet, to page 2, you'll see the next 3. And if I go manually to page 3, you should see 1 because I have 7 total. So without too much work, we've got it all set up. To make it easier to navigate though, let's add those pagination buttons. We want to add pagination buttons. And so I'm going to come over here to my components. We'll look inside blog and I'll just add like pagination .astro. Okay. And then inside here, we're going to get something actually, if I come over here to the page and I console log this, you'll see not only do we get data, but we also get a couple other things. So you'll see I get a URL object that includes the current URL, the next URL, the last URL, all that kind of stuff. So I can actually pass this on to my pagination function and use this to reference. If it has a next, then show that button. If it has a prev, then show that one. And it actually includes the link itself to it. Now notice we also have this current page, which we can use to title stuff as well. So maybe let's do that first so I don't forget. So we'll get rid of this here. And my blog now here, I want to make sure that this is in curly brackets. We'll use a template string. We'll say like page. And then what we can do is take the page. If I use the template string properly, we'll do page.current page. And that should say like page 1 or page 2. Now we're not yet showing that in the hero, but it does actually show it up top here, right? Page 1, page 2. Maybe let's make this capitalized. Okay, the other thing I want to do is take my pagination like this. We're going to pass it both the previous and the next if they exist. So here I can just take prev, and remember we saw that the page has a URL object with a prev option. It may or may not be there, but if it is there, we'll pass it on. Same thing here with the next, like that. Okay, so now we've got both of these coming into pagination. Let's come over here, and we're going to make sure that down below we have a little div. We'll give this a class of pagination. And then we simply want to check to see if we have either the prev or the next coming in. So first let's grab prev and next from astro.props. And so that it knows what to expect here, we can give it the type of props where we say the prev doesn't have to be there, but if it is, it should be a string. And same thing here with next. So down here, what we're going to do is say that if prev exists, then we simply want to show a link. So let's pull in my link component, which doesn't seem to want to show, but it should say previous like this. Let's go ahead and just check. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now it's coming in and we need to point an href here. So this href would be prev, right? If it exists, that should actually be a URL. And the variant here, I want to be secondary. So that's if prev exists. And then there's another option that would be if next exists. So let's grab both of those, change them to next, and then this would be next. Okay, so if I come down here, I should just have next. If I click here, now I should have both of them, so I can go back or forward. And notice they're just pointing to the right links automatically. Eventually I get to where I don't have a next, and I only have a previous. Maybe we want to change this just to say prev, I don't know. All right, if I jump back over here on this page, we also want to show a little hero section. And if you see here, it says my blog, all this stuff, but then it has page 1 or page 2, whatever it happens to be. So we'll do that in the next video. We've got a hero section up here we want to add. So I'm going to come over to our blog folder under components. We're going to add one called blog hero.astro. This will be a little bit different than our other hero, enough different that in my thinking it needs its own component. So here, let's come over here. We're going to have a section here. We'll give this an ARIA label. This will just be called like hero section. And it also needs a class. In fact, a couple of them will have blog hero and also container. So both of those there. And we want a few things here. We want the image. If I come back over here, this image here, and then this content. This will be our header, my blog page 1, my blog page 2, whatever that happens to be. So let's grab the image first of all. We'll grab that in a second. And then just below here, we'll have a header where we'll have our heading like this that we pull in, tag name. This will be H1 because it's the name of the whole thing. And the size, the tag size will be H2. This should have a couple of things. It should say my blog, and then it should also have a span down here with the current page, which we haven't passed in yet, so we'll do that in a second. Below the heading though, we have this paragraph tag, and I'm just going to paste this in from the finished site. Now it's hard to see what's going on because I haven't actually imported it, so let's do that. Let's come back over this way. And let's pull in blog hero like this. We'll just close this off. And now it shows in right here. We haven't obviously added the image or anything else, so we'll do that here in a second. First, I want to go ahead and pass in the current page like this. This will just be from my page.current page. We've already seen how to do that. But because I want to show this in the actual H1, right? So let's grab this current page and make sure that we're accepting it here. So I'll say const current page, and this is going to be from astro.props. And I'll just type this quickly, where my current page will be a type of number. Okay, so I should be able to take this and pass it in right here. So I'll just say page current page.toString. Because technically it's a number, so the browser should do that for me, but hopefully that should work. Now I don't think I actually saved this over here. Okay, there we go. So now it's coming in toString. I think that the way I set this up, this actually needs to be a div. Again, I told you the CSS is a little fragile, and that's just so that we could focus on Astro and not on writing CSS. If you're interested in the CSS, I actually did 2 live streams like coding this whole thing out. So you're welcome to go find those and just watch me do all the CSS if you have interest in that. Okay, lastly, we need to pull the image in here. So we've actually got the hero over here. Let's go ahead and grab the image from here. We'll just import it, call it the same thing. This will be components. And then here we'll have assets. Okay, so this should be Katie right here. So it'll be katie.src. And then we'll call her Katie House, since that's her name. Okay, and just like that, this should be dynamic. So if I come over here to page 2, this should now say page 2. Page 3 should say page 3. So everything is now dynamic based on whatever page I happen to be on. Now, if I inspect this HTML, we've come up against something in the past that we didn't really fix it at the time, but now I'm feeling we definitely need to. So if I come in here, you'll notice, let's see, this is an H2. Now that happens to work well here. However, if I go to the home page, we hard-coded that so that these are also H2s. However, it's kind of already in a section that has an H2, so these should probably be H3s. We actually did the same thing for the projects as well. So I kind of feel like we should fix those. So let's fix those real fast. I'm going to come all the way out to my blog card, and the blog card does not take in a type. It just takes in a post. So I'm going to say like heading or tag name. Let's just do the same thing, right? So this tag name here, tag name, I'm just going to manually say that it can only be H2 or H3. You may want to make that more extensible, and you're welcome to do that if you want. So this tag name is going to be passed in down here. Okay, cool. So it's going to error out on us. That's fine. That's what we'd expect. But now if I come over here to my page, this is going to say I need a tag name. So the tag name here should be H2, right? That's what we want it to be on that page. However, if I go to my index page right over here, this tag name, I actually want it to be an H3. So that's now working properly for the blog posts. Let's do the same thing here for the projects. So here I'll say tag name. In this case, I want this to be an H3. If I go to the projects page, we're going to do this in reverse this time. Here I want to pass the tag name. We called it something else, project wrapper. Remember, even though it's the same thing, you can name it whatever you want. And the name conflicted with the page name, so that's why we changed it. In this case, I want this on the actual page. These should be H2s. Because we already have an H1, now all these can be H2s. So last thing I need to do is jump over here. I can just paste in that same type, tag name. Here we're going to have a tag name as well. And unfortunately, we're going to kind of have to hopscotch this along. So let's pass it one more time. Tag name will be whatever the tag name is. And then the project card can take this in as well. We'll do the same thing. Tag name once again. Let's see right here. Tag name. And we'll hopscotch this along one final time to here. That way they're kind of all the right tag where they're supposed to be. Say I forgot to pass one more here. Tag name equals tag name. Okay, hopefully that made sense why we did that. Now these are properly H3s right here. They still look the same because we set the sizing differently, but they're semantically an H3, whereas on the projects page, they should now be H2s. Same thing here for the blog post. On the homepage, they're H3s. Here, they should be H2s. By my eye, we've done everything on this pagination page. The only thing we have left to do is to actually render the page itself. If I go into one of these pages, it correctly goes to the right place, but there's nothing there and I look very lost. So let's fix that in the next lesson. It's time to build out these blog pages. We've of course got our paginated pages, but when I click into any of these, it just says, are you lost? All right, so we've hit our 404 page. We're ready to build out these individual blog pages. If I click into any of these, you'll notice that it just gives me the 404 page. So I need to come over here and create another route, and this is also going to be dynamic. Now I can name this whatever I want, like page.astro or slug or pizza. It doesn't really matter. In this case, let's just keep it at page.astro. Now the difference between these two is this is a nested catch-all route, and this is a singular catch-all route. Now the way this works, if something matches this singular page, it will first use this. Otherwise, it will look in the nested route. So this overrides this, and if we had an actual named route, like index.astro, and it was inside this blog folder, that would override these as well. We went over that specificity as far as how it works, but I'll leave you the docs if you want to check that out as well. Okay, so inside this pages one, what we need to do is go ahead and get static paths again. Because we're in SSG mode, if you do want to add SSR, you're welcome to. This particular portfolio site didn't really have a great use case for it, so that's the only thing we really haven't gone over again that we already went over in the first 5 lessons. But if you were to do that, it's extra easy because you just pick that off, like the ID or the page, whatever you end up naming it. In this case, it would be like the page, right? So you'd say like const page, and this would just be from astro.params. Now in this case, we are not using SSG, so we'll actually have to make it a little bit more complex. Now in this case, we're not using SSR, so we'll have to actually make it a little bit more complex. But if you were using it, it would actually be a little bit easier. Like I said, we're going to use get static paths like this, and let's say we want it from here. And here, once again, I want to grab the posts. In fact, I probably can grab this from this right over here, right? So we can just grab this right here and drop this in here. Now what we're going to do is look over each of these. I need to first of all pull these in, I guess. So let's do async, and we need to pull in get collection, and now it should all work. So here we'll call this like helpers. Okay. Now in this case, what I need to do is instead of looping over groups of them and returning the pagination function, here we're going to loop over all of them, and for each item, we're going to return a single page. So if we happen to hit that slug route, then it should match, and this will take priority over those blog paginated routes. So here I'm going to return my posts.map, and then I'll take my post here and simply return an object. So to return an object, I've got to wrap it in parentheses, and we've got 2 things I want to return here. We're first of all going to return the params. This is required because I have to actually say, hey, when this particular page route matches, show the page below. So in this case, we named it page right up here, so I need to make sure I name the params page as well. So this is just going to be my post.data.slug because we give it the slug name. So whenever this slug matches after blog, so progressive web apps or whatever it happens to be, I'm going to return this page. Now I don't have to do this next part, but since I've already looped over all the data, I can go ahead and pass props as well. And instead of having to do an additional fetch down below here, I've already got the access to the data right here in this post. So I'll just pass that along as well. So I'll just pass along the entire post. Down here, I can simply grab the post. This is going to come from astro.props, right? Because we passed this one down right here. And then what I want to do is grab the layout so we can actually start to see this take shape. So I'll have some stuff in here later, but for now I need to go ahead and grab the title and the description, and we're going to pull these both from the data that comes in this post. So probably the easiest thing to do here is just to destructure this so we're not typing that all over every time, like post.data.title, post.data.description. We'll just do it once, description. And to help me out, let's go ahead and do post.data here, and then pub date and author. There we go. Autocomplete is a wonder. So now I can go for here and make sure I just have the title. That's the title. The description will be the description. Okay, so that should be passed along to the layout. Now if I refresh over here, you should see that. The title right there. The description is obviously part of the metadata, and our stuff is right here. Perfect. Okay, now in order to get the content of the markdown file, you might remember that we've got a content component we can get like this, content. It's uppercase, that's important. And we're going to get this from await render, and this comes from astro:content. Now this rendering engine takes the entire post, so we'll just pass in the whole post like that, and it should return to us this Astro component. Now we've got a little bit more to do here, but one of the things we're going to want, if I scroll down here, we're going to want a section here, and I'm going to give it a section, and we'll say aria label, and I'll name this like blog content or something, and I'll give it a class, and this will be blog content. And inside here is where I want to put that content. Now I don't want to put it like this, it's actually an Astro component. So I want to put it just like that, and all my content shows right here. Now it's using the default styling for all these, and I've added a little bit as well with this blog content class. So we're already pretty set, we just need to add the upper section. So if I come back over here, it's this, and then we've actually got this as well down this way. So let's go ahead and do that kind of one after the other. So at the top section, here we're going to have a section, and I'll give this an ARIA label as well. We'll call this blog metadata, which happens to be the class as well, blog metadata. And I've got a couple things inside of here. I've got a header, and I've also got my image. Let's see, I don't think I actually got my image. So let me grab it in place of the author, because we're going to do something a little bit different for the author like we did before. But I'll grab my image inside here, and I'll just leave that as an empty alt, close that off. And this is image.src. Okay, so that's coming in nicely. Now we just got the header area. We already have our formatted date, so I can pull that in as well. This just takes our pub date like that, and it should work the same as before. So it shows up right there. We've also got our heading. There we go. Tag name. This should be an H1, right? Because it's the name of the blog post. And the size, we'll do H2 for that. Close this off and throw the title in here. And I did that again, tag size. Okay, perfect. So now both of those are showing. The last thing I want to do is add the author if it's there and the description. So let's add the description because that'll be there no matter what, description. And then finally, if we have an author, which we should, we're going to add it right below here. Okay, so we've got to do the same thing we did before, which is to grab the author and do that extra query. So I'll say const author, and I've just named it author here so that I can simply await get entry like this. We're going to await the post.data.author.collection, and then one more time, the other thing we need is the ID. Okay, so this author right here will either be present or it'll be undefined. If it is present, which it should be, then I should have author, and here I just want to put this inside of a small tag, which is by author.data.name. So there we go, we've got the date, we've got the title, we've got the author and the description. Image shows below, which means the last thing we've got is this little bio section down below. So under components, under blog, we're going to create another one. Let's see, let's call this, let's just copy this blog hero. We're going to call this like author card. Now in this case, they all happen to be her because it's like her portfolio site. I just wanted to show how to do this author thing. So that doesn't super make sense, but hopefully you'll forgive that small thing so you can learn or remind yourself of that. Okay, so the author card is what we want to pull in. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this, let's see, down here. So I'll say author card. If I hit enter, that should pull it in. And let's clean some of this stuff up. Okay, hopefully that helps make sense a little bit. This author card obviously is not correct yet because it's expecting something like the current page, which we're not giving it. So let's get rid of all that. And we'll get rid of this here as well because we're going to change that around. Let's rename this ARIA label. I'll call it like connect with Katie or something. And here I'm going to call this blog bio, but we'll leave it at container. The image, that should actually be the same, so we can leave that alone. Here, let's go ahead and make this an H2, but it can stay as an H2 as far as size. And here I'll just say, hey, I'm Katie. You can grab that if you want to from the finished site, or you can type it out if you want to. Now this should actually be the same as well, but there's one other thing we need to do, and that is to add a link. So the link right here, see that's not coming in. So the link right here, there we go. Let's go ahead and close that out. I need to make sure I move this up so it's with everything else. Hopefully I've done that on most of the pages just to keep stuff organized. But we have an href, and this is just simply going to point to the home page, and then that section, that ID, which we have not yet done, called connect. And we'll simply say, let's connect. So now if I scroll down this way, it should be on the bottom of every single page where you can click here, and it should take them to the home page and eventually scroll to that section that we've yet to do. So we're done with the entire blog page, and this should work for every single blog because they're all going to use the same syntax here, right? They're going to look up each individual one. It'll check to make sure that the page slug right here matches wherever we're at, that param. If it does, then it will render all the content just like this. Now, speaking of this connect section, we've yet to build that. It should go right between here, right between these two things. And if I jump over here, you'll see it. This right here, we want to build this out, and we're going to do this with a React component just to remind you how to embed UI frameworks inside of Astro. In this video, we will prep that connect section, and then I'll also show you one other thing before we actually build out the React component in the next video. So it's going to be between these two things, the recent projects and the recent posts. And we're going to call it connect. All right, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what I happen to call it. So I'll come over here, and this is just going to be connect, uppercase like this, .astro. So right over here, let's go ahead and just add this here, connect, like that, and it'll just be an embedded component. So it should have added right there. It did. Cool. Let's come over here, and I want to do a couple things up top. I need to go ahead and import some assets. In fact, just a single one. This will be import Katie once again from, and then let's go into our assets, and I'll grab my avatar. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then we're going to build out a React component. Now, right now, this is not going to work. In fact, if I try to build it, it's going to yell at me. So just note that we're going to bring in the component right here, and we'll do that later. So let's scaffold this out, section, and we're going to give this an ARIA label. You know the drill at this point. We'll call this like connect with Katie. And this should only exist on the home page, and I think the 404 page as well is where we're going to put it. It does need an ID because remember they're all pointing to that connect like that. Doesn't need the pound sign. There you go. And then what we're going to do is inside here have a class of form wrapper. So this is a div with that class, and I'm going to have another div inside here that just has an image inside of it. Now I'm doing the div so that I can do the little hand wave thing, which you'll see in just a second. So if I say src or katie.src, and then this is going to be Katie house like this, and I scroll here, you'll see that this happens because of some CSS. So we're just dropping that directly in there. Now here's where we're going to put the contact form right here. So that will eventually show here. Let's go ahead and add this same component though, this connect component, to the 404 page so I don't forget. So I'll come over here and let's see, below the hero, I'm simply going to have the connect right here. And that should have imported right here, and it does. Cool. So now we're set there. If I come to any random page that doesn't exist like that, it should show right here. It looks a little weird with both of those there, but maybe you'd have more on your 404 page as well. But I want to show you one other thing. If I come over to my Astro config right here, you see that we don't have any integrations. Now, if you know a little bit more about Astro, even though we haven't talked a lot about this, there are certain integrations you can add here. React is one of those, and I've shown you that before. Tailwind as well. Well, Astro also includes one called sitemap, and that's especially important for something like a blog. So I'm going to come over here and do npx astro add, and we'll just add a sitemap. So when I add this, it's going to do a couple of things. It'll install the package, and then it will also update that Astro config. Now, this actually automatically builds a sitemap for me. So if I do npm run dev like this, we can actually add this to the head of our site. So I'm going to come over to base head, and let me come down here, and I can say link rel. Down here, we can just simply add a link tag, and we'll say that this is a site map, and then we'll give it an href here where we point this to our site map index like this .html. And this is going to be where Astro builds the sitemap. Now this will help crawlers see all the pages on our site, including our blog posts, and all our pages directory, including our blog posts, the projects, and all of that. So that's one little extra thing I wanted to show you. I hope you feel so ready to build this out, even if you're not comfortable with React. We're going to keep it pretty simple. And if you need to, you can just copy the code in the end and just kind of follow along to understand it conceptually if you're not going to be writing React yourself. But let's come over here. The first thing I need to do is actually add React to the project. So I'll do npx astro add react. And then I'm also going to install something with npm in a second. But this is going to install everything I need to run React inside of Astro, and then it will update my tsconfig, and then it will update my Astro config and my tsconfig. Next, I want to install a package, npm I react hot toast. This will just give us little toast messages, and it's a nice addition. Okay, so npm run dev, we'll get that back up and running. Okay, so we need to now create a file, and I'm going to do this over this way. Let's just put it at the same spot. So in components here, we'll call it contact form.tsx. I'll call this contact form like this. We'll simply return like, I don't know, a form right now like that. And then I want to make sure that this is a default export. You don't have to do that, but in this case I will. Default export contact form. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and embed this over here. Let's go ahead and pull this down here so it's at our component spot. And by default, when we're embedding React, it will render the HTML using Astro, but it won't actually hydrate anything with JavaScript. So I can do a bunch of React-y stuff in here if I want to, but nothing's going to work unless I give it a directive. Now, the one I usually use, unless I have a reason not to, is client:visible. Now, what this does is it will not load the React until that section is on the page. That way, if it's further down the page like we've got right here, and they never scroll this far down, I don't have to take the hit of loading React. Okay, so now that we've got that, we know it's going to work, and that's really important to remember to have. Now, right off the bat, let's do a couple of just kind of housekeeping things. I need to add a class name. If you're not used to writing in React, class name is what they use for class, and there's a whole history behind that, so I'll leave it to that if you don't know already. Contact form, though, is what we want to give that. Now, we don't actually have access to our Astro components inside of here. There's some ways you can pass those down. but I won't get into that right now. Right now, we'll just use a standard H2 tag that says like, let's connect. We know it's actually working now. Let's go ahead and paste in this from the site. You can grab that as well. And then we're going to keep this real simple. I'm just going to have a label. We don't need this to be HTML4 because we're going to actually wrap the input, but it does need to say your email. And then we'll have an input right here as promised. Now we've got several things we want to add here. We want this to be a required. We want to make sure that this is a type of email. We're going to give this the name of email. And that way we can actually grab this off the form data API just using JavaScript. We might as well autocomplete this as well. That way if somebody has like on their phone, their email address, it can just automatically click on there. So email. And then finally I'll have a placeholder and I'll just do something like katie@email.com. Okay, so it's showing up right there. Perfect. And if we go bigger, it goes next to each other like that. Below here, we're going to have a button. And one of the nice things about the way we set that up is if it has a class name of link, it looks like our standard button, which is what we happen to want this one to look like. We're going to set the type here to submit. And then for now, let's just say like contact me down this way. We're going to change that dynamically in a second, but now it actually works as expected. Now we need to find a way to capture this event right here. Because by default, when you submit a form, if I do like katie@email.com and submit it, it's just going to submit it to the actual page. So I don't want that to happen. So let's come back here. What I want instead is to capture that and do something with it. Now we can keep track of whether or not it is submitting so they can't like hit this multiple times by using a little bit of state. And in React, you can do that with something called use state. So I'm going to have is submitting and set is submitting. We'll do like use state. I'll grab this from use state and we'll set it to false to begin with. Now we can actually disable the button if it is submitting. So we'll say disabled is submitting. So if it is submitting, it'll disable this button. And then we can make this dynamic right here by just saying that if it is submitting, then I want it to say submitting. Otherwise, I'll just have it say contact me. Okay, the next and last thing we need to do is actually handle the submitting of the form. Now I want to go ahead and grab access to this form, the actual form element that will be in the DOM. The way React works is it has like a virtual DOM that it's diffing constantly between your code and essentially the DOM in the browser. So we need to actually grab reference to this, and we can do that with a ref like this. So to grab reference, we're going to come over here and say const form ref equals use ref. And you don't have to type this, but since I'm using TypeScript, I'll go ahead and do that. This is HTML form element like this, and then we'll set it to null by default. And then we'll come down here. I kind of made a mess of that, didn't I? Where we'll say form ref. So this allows us to get access to the actual ref inside the DOM itself, not the virtual DOM. That'll come in handy in a little bit. And then finally, I want to make sure that on submit, right here, we're going to pass it a function we're going to write called handle submit. So up top here, let's go ahead and grab this const handle submit. This is going to be an async function. We'll grab the event, and then we want to go ahead and prevent the default. This is standard JavaScript stuff. So in other words, when we submit, don't submit it to the page, prevent the default. So I can come over here and just console log like E if we want to. And when I submit this, you'll notice it doesn't do anything visibly, but if I come over here to the console, eventually this will show. Let's see, let's try it again. There we go. All right, so right here, this synthetic event that's been fired by React. So we know that React is actually controlling this, which is great. Now, if you're concerned about this typing, one of the easiest ways is to just grab it from right here. So we know this is a form event handler right here. So I can go ahead and just type this whole thing like that. And I have to pull this in though from React. So now it knows exactly what it is. Now, typically when I'm handling forms with JavaScript, the form data API is so nice. I usually use that form data equals new form data. You can do this in vanilla JavaScript as well. We're just going to grab the e.current target. In this case, we could also use the form ref to grab that, but we're already submitting it, so this should work. Now, form data will look at any inputs that happen to have a name attribute. This one does, so we should get back email inside of a form data map. But what I'm going to do is just pick off the individual item. So I'll say like if there is no email for whatever reason, I should throw an error. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you may want to handle this UI. I don't want to make this a UI course right now, but I just want to show you one of these things. We did pull in a little helper. That was that toast library, React Hot Toast. And this works by adding a toaster, which is like the container for the toast, and then individual toasts. So I'm going to come over here and let's just add a div. Actually, this doesn't really need to be a div. It can just be a fragment like that. I'll come down here and add a toaster like this from React Hot Toast. Okay, and because we're already inside of a React component, I don't have to hydrate this because the entire thing is already hydrated. So what I'm going to do is say if there is no email, which this email should come from form data.get email. So if that doesn't exist, then what I want to do is fire an error. So I'll say toast error. So now that I have the toaster in there, I can grab the toast from React Hot Toast. And I'll say that this is a type of error. And I'll just say, please enter your email. Now you could do additional checks. You probably should, where you're checking if it actually matches certain criteria. But this will work for our simple purposes. And then we would simply return. Now just to see how this would work, if I get rid of the name email, this should not be there. So it should fire for me. So now I can come over here, do katie@email.com, and notice it fires this error message for me. If I put it back and I resubmit, you'll notice that it no longer fires, but it doesn't know what to do. Now, if you're used to working with React and you're like looking for an API endpoint, we're going to get to that in just a couple of modules, I think. For now, we're just going to pretend that we're hitting an API endpoint or something like that to handle this, to send them an email, to store this contact somehow. So we'll say like hit endpoint, all right? So some kind of endpoint that we haven't yet figured out how to do. We'll do that in a little bit. But to mimic that, why don't we go ahead and await like a new promise? And here we'll just resolve, and we're just going to set a timeout where we then pass the resolve after like, I don't know, let's do like 1500 milliseconds. All right, so this should say contact me, say submitting, and then after 1500 milliseconds, do something. Now we've yet to actually like change this back to is submitting false. So we'll have to do that as well down here. Once it comes back, we're going to assume that we've been successful. So we'll toast.success, and we'll say like, thanks, I'll be in touch, or something like that. Now we can pass additional options here, like duration. I could pass like 4,000 milliseconds, and it will allow that toast to be a little bit longer if I want. I could have done the same thing here. There's a bunch of cool options here. It's a really simple and like elegant library. I guess before we do that though, let's go ahead and set this back to false. So now if I come over here, it should say submitting, and then it's successful and says, thanks, I'll be in touch. So that's what we want, but our email address is still here. That's why we grabbed the form ref earlier. So we'll take the form ref, and again, this is kind of looking across our virtual DOM and looking at the real DOM and diffing this. So we need to actually say, hey, is it currently there? If it is, then we want to go ahead and reset it. So that will just clear out the form. That's just standard JavaScript stuff, but now with the connection between our diffed DOM or virtual DOM and the real DOM. So now if we did all that correctly, I can come over here and it should, after 2 seconds or whatever, a second and a half, say thanks and clear this out for us. And that's it. Now our project is done. I can go ahead and open this up full screen. We can see everything we've built throughout this module. I hope this gave you a lot of confidence that you can do everything we've been working on. Now, it may have taken you longer or shorter. It may have seemed rushed, or it may have seemed slow. Everyone's a little bit different. Just be patient with yourself. Have a lot of confidence to look at the documentation. Learning how to read docs is really important. And if there's something I can do to make it easier for you, let me know. We should also just double check that that worked as well over here. It should have. Let's just check. Yeah, okay, perfect. Obviously, we're not doing anything with this yet. The email address, we'll look at that once we look at dynamic endpoints. Okay, there's one more thing we want to do, and that is to actually get this thing live. So we're done coding, but I want to show you how to publish this somewhere. Now, it depends what platform you use. I'm going to show you how to do it with Netlify, but Vercel would work, or you can just build the files and then drag them over to some server if you're using FTP or something like that. Whatever you happen to be doing, Astro can do it. Let me first of all show you how you build the site. If you wanted to build it locally, you can go npm run build. I think I've shown you this before, but it actually builds all the files, in this case, statically. And you can see we've actually got a problem with the sitemap integration. We didn't add one configuration option because I want to show you how to do that here in a second and update your site as well. So let's come over here. We're going to do npm run dev and get back up and running. This uses the dev server. So right over here, this is just using the dev files. Now that I've built though, I do actually have another option. If I do npm run preview, there's a command that grabs all my built files and actually shows me everything. Now in this case, it should look very much the same way, but it's actually using my distribution files right here to actually serve me my built files. So these are the final compressed built files, all that by Astro. And now this should work the exact same, but I'm actually using, again, these files instead of the dev files. So that's a nice way to test to make sure everything's working before you get it up and running. Now, like I said, we're going to set this up with Netlify. And in order to do that, I'm going to push my code up to a GitHub repository, have Netlify watch that, and every time I make changes, it will automatically rebuild my site. So let's come over here. I'm going to go ahead and add a new one. So at GitHub, you can just go like new like this, and it will create a new one. Let's call this something like a dev portfolio site. module 6. All right, something super long like that. In this case, I'm going to keep it as private because I don't want this to get confused with my course itself. So I'm going to go ahead and create this new repository. Now you can do this in a bunch of different ways. I happen to have everything committed locally here. So I could have also just done this in one go from the command line, but let's go ahead and grab this since I've already committed stuff. All I need to do now is just add my remote. So I'm going to grab this right here, and I'll go ahead and add my remote. Okay, just like that, it should have pushed everything up, and I can actually come over here and just refresh, and I should see everything right here. So I do, so that means everything is working properly. The next step is to connect this to Netlify. So you can go to app.netlify.com and create a team, and then go ahead and import an existing project. I'm going to connect with GitHub. This should allow me to basically authorize Netlify to read things inside of here. I'll say it can. It should be authorized. And now I can search, and there it is. It's a private repository. I'll click on here. I can give it a site name if I want. So let's just call this the same thing. How about that? And it guesses all these things by reading. I guess it reads them all, right? So it knows to npm run build it, and then that this is the distribution folder, or that's the folder it should publish, right? And that should be the same as over here. Okay, cool. So that should all work. And I could just go ahead and deploy Dev Portfolio Site Module 6, which is quite the name for a site, and it will start to build this. Now, you can actually watch it build live if you want to by coming inside here, and it will walk you through all the build steps. Let me actually make this larger so we can see this. If there is a problem, sometimes this can be really helpful to see what the issue is. Now, just like that, it's already done, which is awesome. And I can actually open my production deploy right here. This is now live on the internet for anybody to go to. Now, of course, you can hook up a custom domain, and then it can be somewhere different than netlify.app if you want. But right now, that's where I've got it hosted. So I'll actually link this in all of the project's files here. Now, you may remember I showed you had an issue with the sitemap integration, and I actually need some kind of URL so I can build the sitemap. And since I didn't have one, I didn't add one, but now I do have one, so I can come back over here, and I just need to add the site like this, and I come up. So now that I know where the site is, the sitemap can use this to build out that whole sitemap. So we can actually make sure that this is going to work. npm run build. Remember, we got that issue before where it told us site was not defined. Now that's not the case, and it actually builds the sitemap right here. And if you want to see where this is at, we can go ahead and npm run preview it, right? npm run preview like this, and it should spin that up. And let's jump back over here, and we can just attach sitemap like this, and you see it actually creates the sitemap for us. And the way it does it by default, it's going to drop it in right over here. And so we can use this to then go to that sitemap and see everything else. Now, this isn't yet live, so if we go here, nothing should be here, right? But the nice thing is, since we've connected everything up to GitHub, all I have to do is commit this. Come over here, and I could add something like add site property, and then I will go ahead and commit and sync the changes and push them up. And as soon as I do that, these should come over here, right? And then Netlify will watch that, and then as soon as it sees that I've pushed new code, it will go ahead and restart a deploy. Now you can stop this behavior if you'd rather like manually do a deploy, or you can even deploy it directly here from your code if you want to, and then push it up to Netlify that way. You've got a bunch of different options, but this is the default, and it's a really nice default as far as I'm concerned. Okay, it should be ready to go. And if I come back over here, you might remember that we grabbed this, and it should point to this actual sitemap now. So let's go ahead and see if it's actually there. And it is. And look at this. It's got all the different pages listed here automatically, including the paginated blog pages. That's really nice. Google will actually grab these, or any crawler will grab these, and can see very quickly what are the pages on my site. Well, I hope you're really proud of what you've learned and what you've built so far, and maybe you can customize this and make it your own. Again, I'll remind you that the CSS is a little bit fragile, but hopefully at least gives you an insight into how you could build something like this out. Now, the next whole section of the course is really exciting because we get to look into a bunch of other additional things that Astro gives you access to. That's things like internationalization, working with images and the image and picture component, dynamic API routes, which we haven't even talked about yet, view transitions, and a whole lot more.